Good morning from SPUR. We are so glad to be with you this morning to share with you about our research that we've commissioned to learn more about the value proposition of a post-secondary education in Tennessee. You know, across the years and as we've come out of the pandemic, we have continued to see that there's multiple indicators suggesting that Tennessee students are starting to question whether or not going to college is worth it. And so we're seeing that with a college going rate decline that we noticed in May of 2022 with a drop in the college going rate. We've taken this concern on a roadshow over the fall semester to really engage in the communities across Tennessee to learn more about what students are saying about why they're choosing not to enroll in college. Know from insights from that roadshow that students are saying that they have concerns about affordability, they have concerns about transportation, they have concern about the access to jobs, and they're not focused on the careers which will take them further in their life. And we know that there's a need for early career and college counseling. And so we're so thankful that these students are connected with Tennessee Achieves mentors to help them make the connections for why college still matters. And so what we're going to be doing today is talking through some research that SPUR has commissioned to help us better paint a picture of why college at this time is still very important for our students who are preparing to graduate from high school and think about their future. So I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Peter, who's going to give us a presentation. And then from there, Adam and I will engage you in some Q&A, and we're hoping for your deep thoughtful participation as we continue through. But before I pass it to Peter, I just want to highlight who we are as an organization. If you're not familiar with SPUR, it's important for you to know that SPUR is a research nonpartisan organization that was founded by former U.S. Senator Bill Frist, and we are dedicated to making sure that all students have access to a high quality education from K-12 all the way through college, and that they're able to enter the career of their choice. That is what we spend every day thinking about. And so we are so delighted to spend time with you today so that you better understand our work. And at the end of this presentation, we'll share with you how you can connect with us if you want to learn more about SPUR. So thank you.
All right, cool. So I'm going to take us through some of the research that we'll be sharing here today, and just a quick preview of sort of what happens today. Talk a little bit about why we looked into the questions around college, sort of the value proposition and what Tennesseans think about college, and then get into some of the actual findings from the report that we commissioned from the UT Knoxville Center for Business and Economic Research. And then as well as a public opinion survey that was conducted in December, a statewide poll. And then we'll have some time for discussion. And I think part of the motivation and why we're excited really to, as Jamia kind of teed up here, to talk with so many Tennessee Achieves mentors is really think about like the work that you're doing happens in a context. And we want to take this time to really just share what we are learning about that context, with the hope that it really grounds and guides and maybe even re-inspires a lot of, and motivates the work that you're doing every day with actual students, because behind this data that we're about to talk about are actual students who are actually going through the process. And you know, we're going to show you something later about like career lifetime earnings trajectories, and like that's all fun and cool, but like those are real people there. And I want to make sure we say that up top, because I think that also motivates a lot of what we want to try to do in the discussion part of this conversation. So let me just start with something I know most of you are very much familiar with. And so, you know, in May of 2022, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission shared some data that revealed, you know, the college going rate since 2019 has really, you know, we've seen a 9-point drop, and it's continued to trend since 2016. A lot of this is exacerbated by the pandemic. And so, you know, in response to that, our partners at THEC and supported by our team at SPUR, and Jamia was at a lot of these for a bit of a roadshow with nearly 400 stakeholders across the state. And attendees really raised a lot of questions about all parts of the process to obtain a post-secondary education, including things like the actual decision to attend. Like we heard students were receiving mixed messages about next steps following high school in a labor market where like it's really tight, wages are really high for, you know, high school only jobs. And, you know, every region we went to, we heard a story about like how there were entry-level jobs for $20 an hour. That's a very attractive wage for recent high school graduates. The process of attending was also a concern. A lot of students not receiving the advising, the access to pathways, the cultures of supports that they needed to successfully apply and enroll at programs that lead to high wage and in-demand careers. And then finally, another sort of big theme was around attendance and completion, which is stakeholders shared thoughts around debt, perception of the rising cost of attending four-year institutions, combined with some of the non-academic supports that students would need to complete their credentials and degrees. And so related to that, these concerns are very much tied to things we see in the data and we monitor all the time at SPUR, which is really like, if you think about it, bottom line, less than a fifth of our high school students successfully navigate the full journey to getting a post-secondary or college credential. And so if you think about it, from this exercise you see in front of you, like you imagine like 100 high school students starting, and then you look at the different milestones, whether it's graduating from high school, enrolling, returning for a second year, and then ultimately graduating, really like a lot of kids are lost in this. And so really, and this trend sort of continues despite some of the completion rates in higher education where community colleges and universities have pretty steady completion rates, but there's a lot going on inside our system. And so, and I think the other thing that's not as explicit in this, but is also very top of mind for us is we know that, these rates are even more troubling for students of color or for students who are from non-economically, or from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, who may very well be the same students who would benefit even more from access and completion of a post-secondary credential. And for the folks who we're talking to, we know you read the newspaper, you talk to people, you're probably hearing these headlines here are from a selection of outlets across the country, and we'll show you another story inside the state. But like this conversation on the value proposition of post-secondary education is very top of mind, talked about all the time. And I think it is especially hard in a tight labor market. And I think for the mentors in particular, I know you're dealing with high school students who also have like just life concerns. And so like you throw in all of these factors together, and that makes for a difficult body of work to do this. And so we really feel you. And I hope what we're going to share with you buttresses some of why you got into this to begin with. And so I want to also put a quick plug here that Jamia, who you just saw, was quoted in an article from AP. They really took a look at like sort of what does it look like in Tennessee. They really sort of talked to different chambers and students and all these other things about skipping college. And so this isn't just a national conversation, it's a very much active one. And so what does this mean for us? I think, we really commissioned this work because, we wanted answers to a couple of questions. Like, what does the education and labor data show as the value? Like, what's the hard evidence we have about the value of post-secondary education? The second is, what do Tennesseans, because ultimately there is a public investment in this, but then also like, and this is probably unique to this work that we commissioned, was what do 18 and 24-year-olds believe about the value of higher education? They're actually kind of the target audience for this. And then what can we do to really, support students to and through post-secondary education on their way to careers that enable economic independence? It's a goal of ours at SPUR, and so obviously wanted to answer that. So first, I'm going to go over the highlights, and I can't underscore enough that these are highlights. Celeste Carruthers and the team at the Boyd Center at UTK really did a bang-up job writing this out, look at all kinds of data. They go into the level of detail that if you really want to nerd out, I encourage you to read it. But the idea here was to look at economic, labor, and education data over the last decade plus, really understand what were the employment trends, returns to investment for each credential type. So high school only, some college, associates, bachelors, and then really try to use a combination of national and state specific, or Tennessee specific information to try to understand what we can about this value proposition question. And so, like a classic economist, there's a lot of different truths happening at the same time here. Let's start with some of the this is just the situation we're dealing with. So on the one hand, as you know, labor market very tight, lower wage workers are seeing strong wage growth. And again, that's that whole $20 per hour thing. That's when Buc-ee's has I don't know if you've been to the Buc-ee's and they've seen the hiring sign. I mean, I've heard this story and I've seen it myself. I'm like, wow, that's a pretty attractive wage. Returns to the associate's degree from the data, and for those enrolling without completing college are falling. That is something to think about, because I think we're sensing that idea that maybe, hey, there's some issues with the value proposition from a return on investment standpoint. The third place is around, like, we are as a state outpacing the country in the availability of high school level only jobs. And that has an important implication, which we'll come back to later. The sort of other sort of thing we're dealing with and sort of contending with here is employers are starting to provide in-house credentials and are relaxing some education requirements. We saw there's some headlines that Celeste would share in her slides that really get at this too. So that's the like, kind of part of this story. The sort of part that I think for folks on this call, who I would assume that if you're mentoring students to go to college, this is hopefully the more optimistic set of information, which is that earnings and employment outcomes continue to favor college workers. And that's a really important thing here because, and we'll see this again in the poll too. It gets at like, why do people go? And we'll see some interesting information on that side. Lifetime earnings are $1.5 million higher for those with a bachelor's degree than with a high school degree. Almost 400,000 if it's an associate's, or 224,000. Sorry, there's missing K there. Higher with some college. This is all compared to high school only. And then another one is around Tennessee, like what kinds of jobs are we growing faster when you think about college level jobs versus high school only? We are growing college level jobs faster, and you'll see some of the data in a second. And then workers with a high school education are not yet moving into college level jobs in March, which is something that like we see, like, we've heard stories, right? And I'm sure you may have too in your communities around like, oh my God, like all these people with high school only degrees are just getting jobs and like they're actually not sure where the evidence is on that. So just a couple of highlights here. So that right now there are about twice as many openings as job seekers in Tennessee and the United States. So the bottom line is it is a really tough time for employers to find people, which is great for workers actually. Like there's an interesting stuff outside of the scope of this report, but that does create a bit of a challenge for those of us who are advocates for folks getting the types of education they would need for a long run career. And so first sort of indication of this is when we take a look at earnings, is that nationwide sort of, even after the pandemic, earnings continue to favor college educated workers. I might draw your attention to the blue line, which is the high school only line, and compare that to the orange line, the sort of lighter orange / yellow line, depending on how your screen shows it. So the bottom two, you'll see there's a bit of compression between high school only versus like college versus no degree and even associate students. Like there is this idea that the part of what's driving this is that the environment for high school only workers is actually pretty good right now and has been getting a little bit better, which is why that value proposition, there is some truth to why people are feeling, should I really go? But as you'll see in later slides, next one, if you pull it all the way back out though, like it's kind of like what's going on right now versus what's going on over a lifetime. And so lifetime returns to college remain high. And so that's that bit about 1.5 million for bachelors and so on. But one thing I'll just draw your attention to too is just the slope of the line. You'll see that it just kind of keeps sloping up as you think about the age of a person going through a career. And so I think this really gets at this question of like, the benefits may accrue later from promotions or pay increases, as opposed to just a high wage right now. That may not grow very much. And obviously there's also nuance here about degree types and fields and all that, but as a broad point, general point on college, lifetime returns to college. And then you think about other aspects of employment that matter, and that's like, well, what happens in a recession or when jobs are lost? What does unemployment look like? When you look back at different recessions, whether that's the 08 one or the sort of very short recession or economic interruption we had because of the pandemic, you'll notice that the black line on this, which is the bachelor's degree line, continues to be at a lower rate of unemployment all throughout those recessions. So that's really important from a stability standpoint. when you take a look at where the job growth has been, so the opportunity, so not when you lose a job, but what opportunities are available, you'll notice that it's sort of in this, if you compare the last 6 years, like while it is the case that high school jobs have grown, high school only jobs have grown, like bachelor's plus jobs have grown a lot. And so that's a lot about the opportunity that is available to students inside our state who are on that journey to get a degree. And so, and then finally, another highlight we point is in the high school, sort of like this notion that high school only workers are taking the college level jobs. Like, we just haven't seen a lot of evidence of that. And granted, this data only goes up to 2022, future TBD, but it's not like a massive. There may be stories of that happening, but it's not showing up yet in the data. And so a couple of just longer run trends to think about, as a state, we're projected to continue to have higher sort of employment projections compared to the country. A lot has to do with like just people moving to our state and the economic environment we're in our state. The second is around an aging population. And so that's a lot about sort of who is the workforce going forward. What does that mean for the workforce overall? And what does that mean for students who are back in the workforce and the opportunities they have? And then another point that the team at SPUR pointed out is around what are some of the fastest growing industries, and the two they've named are leisure and hospitality. And as you can probably expect, those generally have lower education requirements and lower pay. Right now, there's very strong demand for that. But again, that's the whole like what's right now versus what's later conversation. And then on the other, literally, like I think the next one down from fast growing that they highlight is professional and business services. And so that's and where there are very like education requirements, there is higher pay, generally speaking, and there's like a bit of a possibility of promotion and other things that happen over the course of it. So bottom line here, if I were to just sort of summarize it, short-term value of high school education has improved. That's because of the labor market environment we're in and sort of what's in demand. It's cut into, but not minimize the return to an associate degree and the return to enroll in college without completing a degree. So it's kind of like the high school part has risen a little bit, but the overall sort of earnings gaps remain pretty wide. So the return on investment is high, as the next point says. And then job growth, pay inside our state continue to favor college graduates. We're not yet seeing high school workers moving to college level jobs in large numbers. So we paired this work with a polling. And so, and again, I wish I could go all the way into it. So I'm just gonna give you some highlights here. I'm gonna not do too many charts here because I think the bottom line is, let me first explain like this poll from a method standpoint. We contracted with a Republican and Democratic sort of firm, like based on who they work with, to try to get at a bipartisan view. And a couple of things about this poll that we commissioned that I think I want to point out to this, just to say like why we feel good about some of the findings here. The first is that 800 registered voters. That's actually larger than the usual sample that people go. So more people answering a poll, we can have more confidence, particularly when we try to break it down across political differences or rural, urban, suburban, or 1824 versus the rest, any sort of subgroup that would be interested. And that's important because that's exactly what we wanted to know. We did an oversample of 18 to 24 years because that is a key part of who we're trying to convince, given the first thing we just talked about, which is the sort of decline in the college going rate, and sort of that demographic is so important. And so a couple of highlights, and oh yeah, anytime we talk about polling, this was a snapshot in time, and again, this is we try to create representative samples. So could this have changed? Possibly. But again, this is probably the best information we get about public. What do Tennesseans think about some key issues? So a couple of highlights on the findings here. Tennesseans view higher education positively, yet express only soft satisfaction. So that's like when you ask them, are you satisfied or very satisfied? Satisfied was like, I don't know, something like in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But like when you said very, it was like 10%. So like there's a strength issue here about their satisfaction. It's soft. Voters do say that it's important for Tennesseans to get some type of training or education beyond a high school diploma, but at the same time, these voters also strongly believe someone can be successful without a college degree. Again, forces that I think Jimmy and I and Adam would love to hear more about how you're experiencing some of this in the discussion. When it comes to post-secondary being worth it, voters place a TCAT training, which are our technical college training programs, 2-year community college and non-degree job training programs ahead of a four-year college or university. And I think that tracks with some of the national conversation. But what's interesting is once you actually probe, like, this third bullet point is about what voters generally think about what's worth it for people generally. But then when you ask them the question, what's their highest preference for where their own child would go to school, 4 years are like way up there. So there's a little bit of like that's interesting. I'll just leave it at that. That's just an interesting finding we found, like sort of like what do Tennesseans want for Tennesseans versus what do Tennesseans want for their own children. Other findings, by more than a 2-to-1 margin, Tennesseans believe the purpose of higher education is to help identify an area of expertise for a career rather than create a well-rounded, broadly educated citizen. So I think this gets back to like, and what's fascinating about this too is this is true across political affiliation. And I think that's interesting given just how conversations are separating folks across political. But this was a pretty well-rounded sort of takeaway or held belief across political affiliations. And yet a strong majority of voters and a majority of the 18 to 24-year-olds say that Tennessee's high school graduates are not prepared for high school graduation, for higher education or for a job. And I think that has a lot to do with the work we believe a lot in SPUR, which is that, like, while we are having this higher education conversation, there's a lot to be done in higher education. K-12 has a role to play. While nearly 3/4 of 18 to 24-year-old Tennesseans believe getting an education beyond high school is worth it, there's a strong sense that the value of education beyond high school has decreased, and there's significant concern over cost, which is again some of the stuff you started seeing resonating with the report's findings. And then finally, last couple of bullets here. 18 to 24-year-old, just a couple of things we found particularly interesting in the 18 to 24-year-old cut. They're divided on whether college is worth the investment, particularly if it involves going into debt and it doesn't guarantee it's a clear path, career path forward, which if you flip it around is like, so we got to work on the finances. We got to work on like, what does it mean to increase the likelihood of landing on a strong career path. Nearly 2/3 of these younger Tennesseans would agree that they'd be willing to take on college if they were guaranteed a good job after graduation. So this isn't just a debt-only conversation. This is about what you get in return. And I think another fascinating thing I don't think that comes after this third point is like, a lot of them, among those who haven't made up their mind or don't plan on going, most point to the personal finance question as like the reason. Like, but here's an interesting point too. It's like only 11% of the 18 to 24-year-olds say that their plan regarding education do not include. So it's like a pretty small, like a lot of people are thinking about it. So there's a lot of work to do to sort of think about that proposition. So if you want the full poll results with the fun charts and all the rest, and there's a whole score institute where we even brought in a business leader, a K-12 district leader, and a TCAP president to just talk about what it means for their work when they see these results. Please I encourage you to watch the SPUR Institute and then have access to all the rest of the information here. And so with that, if I were to just sort of bottom line this for you in terms of like things that you might want to consider raising the issue on for the students you're talking with, the community, post-secondary education still really matters. Tennesseans aspire for students to obtain a credential, a post-secondary credential with a degree. Skepticism around it, though, increases when students go into debt or going to post-secondary doesn't guarantee a clear career path. And Tennesseans know we're not doing enough to prepare high school graduates for higher education or for a job. And so really an important priority for us as a state is ensure more Tennessee students are prepared to obtain post-secondary credential degrees that are aligned with career and workforce needs. So with that, I might turn it over to Jamia for the discussion portion of this.
Yeah, so our hope is that we'll have some engagement from those of you who are still with us so that we can hear from you on what resonated with you from this discussion. Our hope is that this is going to elevate themes across our work and that we'll learn more from you beyond what we've already heard from our College Going Roadshow and the research. And so we are going to have a few questions that we're going to ask you, and we're going to ask for you to engage with us in the chat feature. If you have a burning comment that you want to come off mute for, you can raise your hand and we will work to help you be actively involved in this conversation. But our point is to learn from you now that we've shared all this information. And so as we kick off our discussion and we're thinking about questions that we would like to learn from, is how does this information connect with you as a mentor? As you've heard the research and you've also heard what voters say about the value of a post-secondary degree or credential, how does this connect with your work as a mentor? And does this align or contradict with what you're hearing from your students and what students are sharing with you? I'll give you all a few seconds to respond or raise your hand. I see the comment that says there's a perception that post-education will guarantee a job, but the focus will be that it will guarantee a skill. I can say we continue to hear that when we talk about the purpose of higher education, there's two camps. Some people say the purpose of higher education is to, learn more about the world, become well-rounded. That's what you hear usually at four-year universities. Or is it to gain a skill and to get a job? And what we're finding is more Tennesseans are starting to believe that the purpose of higher education is to gain a skill that will ensure that students are ready to enter the workplace once they finish. And so there's a disconnect from what voters say the purpose of a higher education is and what college administrators and faculty believe the purpose of a higher education is. And so I look forward to seeing how we become more connected on that issue in the years to come. And the comment in the chat about students getting access to information before high school, that's an ongoing conversation that we have. And something else that we learned on the College Going Roadshow is that students do need more information about the post-secondary process or the college process well before senior year. If students are just beginning to have these conversations as they approach the summer of senior year, in a lot of cases it is too late. It's more helpful for these students to get access to this information starting in middle school, to start thinking about how their strengths could align with possible college pathways and degree programs. Jacqueline, thanks for sharing that this is concerning as a mentor and that you haven't heard these concerns from your students. I am curious, what concerns are your students elevating? See the concerns about the financing, not having enough money to pay for basic living expenses. This is something that we continue to hear and that the state is wrestling with. The completion grants that were offered this year certainly helped students who were having financial challenges with meeting the basic needs for rent and housing, those needs that happen beyond the tuition and fees. Thanks for your participation here. Is anyone interested in coming off mute and sharing an anecdote or a story that they've heard from a student? This is great. Students need to get realistic information about college and life goals. We absolutely agree. And that comes back to the need for more access to college and career counseling much earlier. We're going to move on to the next question. You can continue sharing information on that response in the chat. We're going to capture all of this and go through and summarize it after this webinar is over. So in a more positively framed question, when talking about post-secondary or college plans, what are you hearing that students are most excited about? Does it align with what we think they're excited about when it comes to job and career, or what is it that they're most looking forward to when it comes to going to college in the fall semester? Moving out of their parents' homes. Amen to that.
Jamia, can I take this opportunity to just answer like two questions at the same time?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Donna asked this question or raised this perspective around students aren't academically prepared or academically challenged. They go to college, don't do well, very discouraging. And I think there was a question earlier on about what the data, particularly the waterfall chart about like whether 1/3 of kids actually make it all the way through. And just to be clear, we are using, broadly speaking, just Tennessee-wide data. None of this is specific to Promise students. But obviously, I look forward to hearing. I'm sure the Tennessee Achieves team has all kinds of interesting information on how Promise students do relative to their non-Promise peers and all that kind of stuff. But I think to your point, though, Donna, the preparation aspect is an interesting one, because at the point of applying, there are certain things that we wish probably could have happened to make sure that the widest set of options are possible. So this is again why I think for us at SCORE, we really think about this is about college going, this is about college completion, but there is a preparation component to this that K-12 has an important role to play here.
Absolutely. And the learning loss that happened during COVID, this is significant and something that we're going to continue to wrestle with as we think about, the COVID classes, the students who were in middle school and, checked out during the COVID experience as they approached high school. Those are students who are now in a time period where they should be making decisions about what happens next for college, and it's hard to re-engage those students. And for those students, it's possible that they may choose to graduate and go straight into the workforce, but we still owe a commitment to those students to help them reconnect back into college and post-secondary opportunities through the Tennessee Reconnect program. And we're often talking about ways to help re-engage those students in the educational system. I did appreciate the comment about family and how important family matters. We often hear that it's most difficult for students who are first generation to pursue post-secondary college career goals if they don't have people in their family who can support them or who are in support of their decision to leave home. A lot of times we have families who are wanting to keep their students in their local communities, and that's often a barrier. Tyler, I saw you came off mute.
Well, no, I was just going to chime in there. I think this one rings really true for the role of a mentor. You're working with a group of 6 to 10 students. It's likely that 2 to 3 of those are going to be the first in their family pursuing college. So we see those for all of you as mentors as the real opportunity students who don't have that person they can turn to, but now they've got you to kind of step into that role. So I think that really rings true in terms of a opportunity for support and an opportunity to get students through the system.
We're going to move to our next question, which we're hoping we can get some insight from you. When talking to students, where do you find that students are getting their information about college and career? Are they getting their information from you as Tennessee Achieves mentors, or are they getting that information from somewhere else? We're just curious of where they're getting their trusted information about what they're going to do after high school. Glad to see the guidance counselors popped up first. The school counselors, their parents. And when thinking about this question, for those of you who have been mentors pre-pandemic, have you noticed the way students access information? Has it changed since the pandemic? I see social media. We're so thankful for the critical role you as mentors play in helping these students who don't have parents to talk to or who feel like they haven't got the support that they need from their school counselors. That's helpful. And I feel like, just thinking about the time we spend talking to college staff, they're still trying to figure out how to approach students and get information to them differently, since the way students access information has changed post-pandemic. Students now want a mix of opportunities to connect with counseling, whether it be virtual, in person, or a mix of the two. And so college career counselors and college admissions officers are having to figure that out. Okay, we're going to move into a discussion. Let's see what just popped up. Yes, trying to reach students through numerous avenues is what's most important and most effective. And we need more employers to continue to promote college and to support scholarship programs and release time from work so that students can pursue their dreams. Okay, so we're going to move on to another question because this is something that we're very interested in. So we have heard what the barriers are for students entering post-secondary, and we know that these are the top 3 things that students tell us as barriers. It's financial, and some of that's come up in the chat. It's family expectations and the culture. It's transportation. And so in the chat, can you tell us, based on your conversations with students, can you vote to tell us what are the barriers that you're seeing shared most often? And if it's something else, you can vote number 4 and share with us what else students are saying are showing up as barriers to them in accessing college. It's interesting to see that financial is such a huge barrier when Tennessee as a state has done such a great job providing access through the Tennessee Promise Scholarship. And so this certainly illuminates the challenge that students are having with financing their education beyond the cost of tuition. So it's showing that beyond tuition, students are still needing additional support. When someone voted at number 6, I'd love for you to elaborate. Or maybe you added them all together. Parental support, mental health, and lack of sense of belonging are also barriers. That's good to flag.
I think one thing as we look at this, Jimmy, I might add to is I'd like to think that most people who are mentors on this call are already folks who believe in college. And I think just want to speak that as we're a research and advocacy organization. I think sometimes it's important to help other folks who believe what you believe remember the data and the research behind it. And so, if this is helpful, sometimes it feels like if you're fighting against generational sort of differences or cultural aspects, it can feel very isolating to do it by yourself. And so if it's helpful to share hey, the data and the research really do confirm that this matters, that the payoff and the return on investment, if that's information that's helpful to share with others, I encourage you to do so. I can feel even inside the concerns you're raising here, that finance is big, culture is big. Finance, you can modify that to it's about the value proposition of going, but also to the career outcomes and those sorts of things that for folks to believe in the value of college already. It's helpful to hear how to actually data's on your side.
And I would add, Peter, too, that we're going to send all of this out to you for those on. So you'll have access to not only today's presentation, but the slides and the information so that you can review this and you can share this data with your students. Because I think quantifying this is really, really valuable for those students who, to your point, we can see in this chat, finance is a big component, but I think this illustrates well to your point earlier, Peter. This is human work, and students have a lot of elements at play here. So even a student who answers one, there's an additional layer that maybe is causing them to hold back. So whatever we can provide you to kind of get this data, and it's on your side, so get it in the hands of students as well.
Thank you. And we appreciate your engagement here we have one final question that we're just curious about, and it's, have you noticed a difference in how work is impacting students' decisions about college, and has that changed? It seems like we've heard some information earlier about how employers are offering some flexibility. Great to see that boyfriends and girlfriends are distractions. We would say that's age appropriate. That's been a long-standing problem with higher education. So that is not new, but there's so many more opportunities for distractions now. So I'll ask for you to respond if you have any reflections on how work is impacting students. And then we're going to move on to the next slide, because I know that we're probably standing between you and lunch. And we want to talk about why this matters for Tennessee. And we hope that as you leave this webinar today, that you understand that post-secondary education still matters, that there is still a value in students choosing to go to college immediately following high school graduation. We hope that you walk away knowing that Tennesseans still aspire for students to obtain a post-secondary degree or credential. It's just there's multiple ways for students to get there. We also recognize that skepticism increases when students are going into debt, or I know there was a question in the chat earlier, or when students are starting at a post-secondary institution, a college or a university, and they're not finishing. That increases skepticism when you see low retention rates and low graduation rates. And so sometimes that goes into the confusion of students wondering why it matters. We also know that students who are looking to develop a skill while they're in college, the program that they choose really matters for them to understand what that's going to mean for them. We hope that a part of this conversation is allowing all of us collectively to get on message with recommitting to a broader view of what college beyond high school can do to help students. We are constantly thinking about ways to redesign pathways and delivery models, to share data, to help students and their families understand how to get access to high-wage, in-demand careers. And we want to be able to respond to students who are saying that they need more advising, more aligned career pathways, and more supports in learning. And so just know that these are things that SPUR staff are constantly thinking about, and we're trying to elevate across the state. And with that, we have our social media, our website information where you can find us more. We would love for you to join our mailing list if you're interested in being invited to more SPUR webinars or events. Adam will prompt you in the chat to share information. There we go. He's given you our social media information there where you can follow us and know how to keep up with us. For those of you who are definitely connecting with SPUR even further, we do have a Complete Tennessee Leadership Institute. It's a cohort of 30 professionals from across the state who meet 4 times a year to talk about college, career, post-secondary access and attainment. If being involved in Complete Tennessee Leadership Institute is something you might be interested in the future, you can follow us on social media to find out when those applications will be available. And with that, the SPUR team is concluding our comments for the day. Are there any final questions? Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Peter and Adam, for being with us today as well.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, Adam, Jamia, for joining us today. Really do appreciate it. And for all those who joined us, I hope you enjoyed this. You hear from me, you hear from our team a lot throughout the year as a mentor. So I think it's really valuable from time to time to bring in some of our excellent partners to get their perspective on the work and to kind of have a conversation about some of these really important topics. So appreciate the SCORES team's time for joining us today. And for all those on the line, we will share out this recording, we'll share out these resources so that you can continue to leverage them in your work with students. But otherwise, we hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. And as always, if you need anything, you can reach out to us at tyler@tennesseeachieves.org, and I'll be happy to help. Thank you everyone for joining us though.